The night of death hammered those youths left in the days along his path to the king. His victims whimpered or screamed at the impact of his mace against their emaciated bodies draped in blood-drenched cloth. They crumbled to the floor, bleeding, crying, or dying. But no one ran away, no one huddled together in protective circles, no one tried to hide, no one fought back. Like addle-brained cows or sheep raised for slaughter, they let death happen as though they had no concept of an alternative. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Library of the Weird. I hope you're doing fine. We have 20 degrees Celsius outside today. It's really warm. And when it's warm like that, I really like to go on trips and visit castles, for example. It's the time of the year again for medieval fairs, and I love everything that has to do with the medieval times. And because of that, I'm really excited for the book I want to talk to you about today. This is Howls from the Dark Ages, a medieval horror anthology. This book was released in 2022 by Howls Society Press. It was edited by P.L. McMillan and Solomon Forse. It's a multi-author anthology. Each of the stories in here is by a different one. It also features cover art made by Joe Redkins, and the design was made by Molly Halstead. I really like the cover. I like the red color the cover has, and I don't know how much you can see from here. We have like a dragon who turns into a peacock. There's a hand coming out of the mouth. We have a woman with a spear and a shield fighting the dragon, I guess. We have some runes on here. A lot of interesting stuff. I really like the cover. And the book also contains a foreword by Christopher Bührmann, who is probably most famous for writing Between Two Fires, which is a medieval horror novel at the time of the plague. Before I talk about the contents of this book, I quickly want to talk about the Howls Society. Howl is an acronym which stands for Horror Obsessed Writing and Literature. This is their second anthology. The first one was called Howls from Hell, and right now there's an anthology on Kickstarter, which will be called Howls from the Wreckage, and is, I think they describe it's for fans for movies like Cloverfield, for example. They have a Discord server with a book club, and you can talk about other fans there. I'm going to link the Discord server in the description. You can join if you want to and talk with me and other people about horror books. And I even think you can find some of the authors who have written stories for this anthology on the Discord server. You can find 18 stories in this book, all of which are kind of medieval themed. Some of the more famous authors in here are Hailey Piper and Cody Goodfellow, who many of you probably know, but to all of you who don't, check out their work. What I find really cool about this book is how it's made up. If you open it, one of the first things you can see is this QR code in here. I believe it's the first, maybe the second time I've seen this. The QR code is for all the content warnings in the book, and I think this is a really nice thing to do. You also, at the end of the book, you have some really cool author biographies, which with nice little portraits of the authors, and not only of the authors, but also of the artists who have worked for this book. And another thing I really like about this book is that it's made up kind of like a trip to the museum, a museum tour. In front of each story, you have like a very, very small paragraph, all of which say something like, let's go on to the next display, look at this, it's really horrifying, what secrets will it hold? And then on the next page, you see the described item, and all of these items have something to do with the stories you're reading next. So that's really, really cool. I've never seen something like that. So before I really dive into the stories, I quickly want to talk about the title of this anthology. As I've said, and as you see, the title of this anthology is Howls from the Dark Ages, with Howls being the Howls Society, but the term I want to focus on is Dark Ages, because I don't know if everyone knows how the Dark Ages are defined, because they're rather loosely defined, although they're very specific in some areas. So the Dark Ages are roughly the time period between 400 and 1000 CE. They kind of start with the fall of Rome and the end of antiquity. It's another term for the early Middle Ages. And it's called the Dark Ages because at the time the term was coined, we didn't have much written evidence, written sources from this time period. This has changed tremendously in the last decades. We know a lot about these so-called Dark Ages. But I mean, before the Dark Ages we had antiquity, and there are a lot of texts from ancient Rome or Greece or Egypt, and even from the Levant. And after 1000 BC, with church being really, really powerful and monks at monasteries writing everything down, we have a lot of textual written evidence. But like I said, the Dark Ages, the dark in Dark Ages is kind of a misnomer, because it kind of suggests that we don't know much about the time. But we do know a whole lot. I mean, this is the time where, I mean, this is the time where we had the migration period. So many people in Europe were displaced and moved to other places. Like I said, it starts with the fall of the Roman Empire. We have the rise of Islam. We have the church taking over everywhere. We have Charlemagne, we have Alfred the Great, even the Viking ages fall into this time period. So we know a whole lot about this. But I mean, when we talk about the Middle Ages, I think this is the best time for writing horror stories in. And if you want to know more about this really, really interesting time period, I highly recommend The Inheritance of Rome by Chris Wickham. It covers everything starting with the fall of the Roman Empire and then going up to 1000 CE. It can be kind of dry and there's a lot of names in there, but I learned a whole lot with this book. So if you're interested, read this. Another thing I really liked about this book is that, like I kind of said, the Dark Ages and even the Middle Ages and stuff like that is a term which is reserved for Europe, the Levant, Northern Africa, but not really for anything anywhere else. But in this book are 3 stories that don't take place in Europe. There's one taking place in China, I think, and then there's 2 taking place in pre-Columbian in the pre-Columbian Americas. There's one set in North America and one set somewhere in Mesoamerica. And I really like those stories. I think those are a few of the best stories in this collection. When it comes to themes in this book, they are kind of all over the place. I think the only theme all of them have in common that they are set in the early Middle Ages. Almost all stories in here contain knights. There are a lot of stories concerned with Christianity, and they don't shed a too nice light on Christianity. And of course, there's all sorts of weird stuff going on in here. And almost all of my favorite stories in here are kind of those stories which are concerned with Christianity. One of my favorite stories is the final book of St. Foy's Miracles by M.E. Bronstein. It's a book about, it's a story about a young woman, a girl who wants to get back into the good graces of her patron saint, who is St. Foy. And she talks a lot about the miracles of St. Foy. The problem is, St. Foy is a child, a very cruel child at that. The miracles kind of mirror what a child would do if it were a real saint. Saint Foy actually is a saint worshipped by the Catholic Church, but in the story here, the miracles Saint Foy performs are really cruel, and sometimes they're nice, sometimes not. They just act like a child, and I really like this idea and the story itself. Another one is called Schizzare. I believe it's pronounced Schizzare because it's an Italian word. It's about a monk who is writing in a book, and he suddenly finds a mushroom in his book, and he eats it, and it appears again and again, and he eats, and this really drives him crazy. And it's a rather dark story, but if you think about it, it is funny as well. I really liked it. But my most favorite story in this book is called A Dark Quadrivium and was written by David Vaughan. This is a story of the church hunting for heretics. There's a heretic sect called like the Albinigarians or something like that, and they encounter 2 of them, and they have a holy book with them. And one of the highest rules of this sect is no one is allowed to read this book. But with the church people is a very educated man who wants to read this book, who wants to translate this book. And while reading this book, he has some crazy things happen. It's a very Lovecraftian story. It's very brutal. There's a lot of blood in there. And I really did enjoy the story. And another favorite of mine is the last story in this book, and calling it a story is kind of false. It's called The Lay of the Dance Macabre by Jessica Peter, and it's written in verse. It's like, I think, 10 pages of verse, and I really liked it. It was such a nice idea, and it really fits the theme of this anthology. And I believe this is everything I wanted to say about this book. I really enjoyed it. I urge you to look into this, maybe look into the Howls Society, the Discord server, the Kickstarter, because they're supporting smaller authors, a smaller press, and I think this is a good thing to do with your money. I hope you liked this video. I hope you're going to read this book, and let me know in the comments if you're interested in this book at all. And maybe also let me know if you're interested in the weird tangents I go on, for example, talking about what the term Dark Ages means. It would mean a lot to me, and it hopefully will make the content of this channel better. Until next week, have a nice day. Goodbye.